Hello, everyone, and welcome to Monday's edition of the Presence Posse Presents. I don't know why I said Monday's edition because we're always on Monday. This Monday's edition of the Presence Posse Presents, and our topic today is presence and blame. And for the moment, we are three. We are Bobby Cobb, Dr. Fred Blam, and yours truly, Miriam Siegel. And we hope to be joined very shortly by Danielle McMahon, our favorite people whisperer. So blame, guys. Go for it. I can take it.
It's 11 hours.
Go right ahead.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll start because
Okay.
I had an interesting reaction to this as a topic. My first reaction, and it's really kind of I'm sort of hanging on to this a little bit, is that blame and presence cannot, and I'm throwing this out as a discussion topic, not something that I necessarily want to argue for, but the statement would be that that they are mutually exclusive. They cannot exist together. As I've been thinking, and that was like a visceral reaction. As soon as we had that in the chat as a topic, I'm like, can't happen. Blame and presence cannot be together. And as I said, I'm open to being convinced otherwise. But as I thought about it, I thought, the amount of time traveling that you have to do and the amount of rational thinking and dealing with the questions of life in order to be pushing blame onto somebody. And to do that, to me, it feels like we need to step out of presence and start time traveling and create a backstory why it wasn't our fault. And it couldn't have been me, and then push it off onto somebody else because I'm looking out into the future and watching a worst case scenario unfold. So just as a general topic, I just would like to throw on the table, do you guys think that they can exist together? And if so, what am I missing?
Okay, Fred.
Yes, you in the back. My answer would be yes and no. We could say they sort of coexist in that blame arises within presence. So there is presence. There is only presence or being or consciousness or awareness, whatever we want to call it. And so that is the space, to my understanding at least, that is the space in which blame arises. However, the no part is that we could also say, like from a truly non-dual perspective, that there's really only one thing ever going on, which is presence or being or awareness. And therefore, it is the only thing that's ever going on. So we could say that blame can only exist as a modulation of presence, but it's still presence in disguise. Make sense?
It does.
Very interesting.
Like
okay, guys. I can be present to my blame.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, actually. Blame exists within presence.
I said it better.
You always did.
I think I could blame you for not being clear enough, Fred. Yeah. Blame. Okay, having listened to you guys and feeling into my own experience, not wanting to, it depends whether I'm blaming myself or I'm blaming somebody else, or I'm in a blame culture where it's just typical to blame and feel offended and all of that and never take responsibility and all of that sort of stuff. If I'm not wanting to be present to what's going on with me, then my focus might be on someone else and making my experience their responsibility, in which case I'm not present to my experience. And I'm not present to the other person's experience. I can be present to my not wanting to take responsibility for my own experience. And I can be present to the other person's reactions to that or non-reactions. I can be present to and aware of my blame and my avoidance. And I can be present to the process of metamorphosis, going from that to going to this is my responsibility, and I'll now take it. And blame disappears because it cannot exist when I take responsibility for my own experience. There's no blame of myself and there's no blame of the other person. It is my experience and my understanding. And Bobby, I see you smiling. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. So what you just said there, Merriam, in a way kind of reinforces that, because if we are present to our blame and noticing, oh, I'm blaming somebody else, I'm looking to shift blame on that, then that becomes what I would call a fun thread to pull to begin a little exploration, what Fred would probably call self-inquiry. And same thing, different words of going in there. Fred, when you did your version of that, I had such a lovely little cool shift in that I had seen, or I was seeing things as an either or type of a scenario, and just listening to you explain it, I felt like I was being pulled from the personal Bobby presence or awareness or point of view or the way that I'm looking at the world to like almost going meta into looking at things from the perspective of presence.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's such a cool little thing that what I felt happening on the inside was it's like he's showing you a bigger picture here, and let's look at it from almost more of a global or a holistic perspective, from the perspective of presence.
Right.
And whereas I was looking at the world, how Bobby would interact with presence. But if we shift to say, well, Bobby, you are presence, look at it from this perspective. So, and this is an interesting show for me, because I figure I feel like I'm like verbally figuring things out, verbalizing my mental processes in going through something that I don't know, and I'm like making my way through the unknown and just trying different things on. So this is cool.
In itself is pretty cool. I think, hello, if it's for me, I'm not in. I think everybody is, like Bobby pointed out about perspective. I think everything is quote unquote accurate from the perspective in which it's being offered. And that's 100% okay. This is very much for me like an in the world, but not of the world thing. So the not of the world, which is the perspective that I offered, is that, presence just arises. But then, Miriam spoke about responsibility. And, to me, the ultimate responsibility is recognizing that it's all arising within me. My experience, as Miriam pointed out in her own better way, is that, experience arises within us. And therefore, what am I blaming someone for? This is all happening over here. So, I completely get that. And I realize that sometimes we live in the world, and I'm not saying blame is necessarily the right word, because that implies a little bit too much like victimhood kind of energy for me. But at the same time, maybe I get into a traffic accident, and, the cops are going to decide who to blame, quote unquote blame, based on who made the error in judgment, whatever it may be. So there's appropriate places where I want to make sure that somebody else is taking responsibility, or that I'm taking responsibility, as the case may be, But blame, there's something in that word. I'd love to hear how it is for you guys, that it just feels like I guess victim is the word that comes to my mind, but I'm curious how you guys see it.
Yeah. I'm actually, because there is this sort of I'm helpless, or I'm not responsible, I'm, poor me, and all of that. And I'm not to make light of, I've been through some horrific experiences, and there's this sort of someone is responsible for acting in a certain way towards another.
Mm-hmm.
My responsibility is how I respond to that, and that is my responsibility to take. But staying and blaming forever and ever, it's a kind of a victimhood thing. I'm noticing, I'm just going to mention as I'm sitting and we're talking about this, being in presence, and it might be what you were describing, Bobby, and it might not be. I'm just noticing sitting present to the conversation becomes I can't come into the conversation at that level of presence because there's no reason to talk about it. It's like blame is a not thing. And I don't need to go there. So I can allow the conversation, but it's not now. It's not present. It's not where my energy or awareness goes. I'm aware of the conversation, but I have no need to talk more. So I'm going less present, like it would be like meta or something, noticing, and then coming into, we are talking about this for a reason. I'm going to bring Danielle in because she's here now. But you guys can, I don't know what that does with you guys, or what you do with it, but please mention something if you like.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
Well, hi, Danielle.
How did that fall for you guys? How did that land for you guys? Anything?
I'm seeing a difference in the way that I perceive the associations that I have between blame and fault. Fault feels like something that is discovered or revealed. You can discover why something happens, whereas blame, and maybe it's that victim thing kind of playing in and coloring the prism a little bit, but blame feels like something that's assigned, and it's like a hot potato that somebody's got to hold, whereas it's I don't know, but fault feels like it's more factual. Blame
feels like responsibility,
emotional. Yeah. Something about that. They feel very different to me.
Blame sounds like it's more about the person, like somehow you're making it more personal when you blame someone. If I say this is your responsibility, I'm just making it clear, how I see it. This is my part. This is your part. But if I'm blaming you, there seems to be some element of, it feels personal to me when you do it that way. Hi, Danielle.
Hi. So one of the first things I thought of when I thought of this conversation was that in the recovery process, I am not to blame for my addiction, but I'm responsible for what I do with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like maybe that's a fault of mine that I fell into addiction, that I'm sensitive to it. And a lot of people you say that it's like an allergic reaction, right? So some people can drink and some people cannot. Some people can drink socially and some people cannot. That's not their fault, but it's their responsibility, right? To drink responsibly, or to, I don't even know if you can use drugs responsibly. I guess you can. They're legal, right? You can use recreational cannabis now legally. So
Right.
I don't know. I just know that that was one of the first things that came to mind. Like it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. So I can't blame how I live my life on that condition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So to be present with blame does leave you in that space of it doesn't fit. Because if you're present, you're taking responsibility for being here, right? In this moment. All of the rest of it really doesn't. And that I get to that a fair amount. Like when I collaborated with a person for a retreat earlier, there were a lot of things that we disagreed on, but at the level of presence, at the heart level, we agreed. And that was really all that was important. Our
Mhm.
presentation was a little different. I'm sure it lands differently from people, but none of that mattered.
My only concern when I heard this topic was that there wasn't that much to say about it. Like, all right, I think we all seem to agree that blame is not a great idea, that there are ways to come from presence or love that maybe that create a little bit more sense of connection and peace and well-being. I think blaming will tend to more solidify your separate sense of me as an ego. It's like right now, I mean, the very nature of blame automatically implies that there's someone else out there that can hurt me and harm me. So the more we can rise above it, or I like the word transcend, because it's just like seeing beyond that perspective, broadening our perspective or something. I think that moves us closer towards love, towards presence, which it just seems like, to my mind, that's the direction we want to move. It's certainly, I mean, I love what Byron Katie says, as I love to quote from time to time. She says, essentially how she defined the shift that occurred for her in 1980 something is, I just learned the difference between what hurts and what doesn't. And it seems that to be in that state of blame and the contraction, both mentally and physically, that is required is painful. And what do we have to do inside ourselves to not realize how painful that is? And it's not that different, Danielle, from, in that way, sticking a needle in your arm. And what do we have to do to deny, not that you stuck needles in your arm as far as I know, but, to deny what we're doing to ourselves when we do that. It takes a certain level of unconsciousness to perpetuate that behavior.
Or disassociation, or just not knowing that there is a different experience to have.
Right.
That, and I feel like we're so strongly conditioned into the drama triangle that requires a victim and a rescuer and a perpetrator, or whatever the other bully name is, that we don't see a way out of that a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's conditioning.
that's very much the way media works. That's how they sell movies. That's how they sell products, is to put you in a situation where you're trapped in that triangle of either being to blame or being a victim or being rescued or being that you need this, right? So we're programmed by the movies that we watch and all of the media in general with this kind of stay in this drama triangle and just feed it or Netflix it or whatever it is that's causing you pain. Don't deal with that, just stay in this loop, and you don't get the experience of peace. You don't see that as an option until you do, right? Until you're in enough pain or something happens, you have some kind of wake up call in your life that says there's got to be a different way. Whether it's, you two, Bobby and Doc, often talk about the high performers that have done everything they were supposed to do to be happy and they still aren't happy. Right? That can be the wake up call. Or you can go the other way, like I did, and end up in the gutter, sort of, and say, oh, but we had kind of a fun conversation about it in our chat, using the gutter as a bowling metaphor, right?
Right.
We had kind of a fun time with that. So Bobby has something planned for recovery and bowling. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Just playing with the metaphor.
Bowl your way to presence. Well, blame is, no matter which direction it's going, in my experience, blame is assigning wrongdoing to someone else or myself, right? And many people who talk about presence and awareness and all that mindfulness and all that kind of thing will often talk about there being no such thing as wrong. That what is, and we're the ones who assign this sort of judgment to it, whether it's wrong or it's right or it's better or it's worse or whatever. How do you guys feel about that? This idea of what is? I mean, some people can misunderstand that as, well, I can do whatever I darn well please, and it's not, I'm not to blame. What is, but that's not what it's about. Or
it is what you allow it to be.
Or it is what it is, whether we allow it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and things happen, and then we react to them. And I think sometimes we can, at the victim, if we're really embracing that victim mentality, we can take that on at the level of identity, and now we're looking at the world through the victim perspective and recognizing that is what's happening can be a good way out of that. And you can become overly attached to something not bothering you and find yourself stifling down emotions that are arising. And I have a good example from yesterday. I react when dogs fight. I react very poorly based on any sort of logic or animal training or anything. Like if dogs are fighting, I will dive into the scrum, which on every level is stupid, but I do it. And I've done it not recently, thankfully, but within the last 3 or 4 years. And it's just dumb, but I do it. This weekend, the dogs squabbled a little bit. One had something and the other one bit, and it was happening right next to my legs. And I just went, hey, and interrupted the pattern. And Carla, who is a very gifted dog trainer and very patient with me as well, looked at me, didn't say anything, but said a lot with the look. Like, God, do we really have to have this conversation again? Don't you realize that your emotions are adding fuel to the fire? And my response was, yeah, I get it. But, it's not like I'm sitting here thinking about it. Happens and I react. So that was something that arose. In retrospect, I can see it was a bad behavior. And I guess you could assign fault to that, although actually the fault there was just that it worked at that time and it broke up the mix. And, so it is what is. And on one way, that is it's very freeing. But it also leads people to say, so what, I just don't care anymore. I could just do whatever. And so I don't have any preferences. I don't put any effort in. I'm just going to sit there and meditate. And, that it kind of leads to that conversation.
That's called nihilism, that, nothing matters, who cares kind of attitude. And I mean, if that's the way things look for you, I guess have at it. But it seems, again, like numb is not what we're going for either necessarily.
Right. Absolutely not.
What is not the same as it doesn't matter.
Right.
Well, you can imagine two things where you've got two people in a kitchen and one of them breaks a coffee pot. And on one level of their reaction can be the person who recognizes the person whose fault it was, didn't do it intentionally. It was an accident. They were doing the very best that they could with the resources that they had available at the point. And the other person just goes, bummer, hate when that happens, and just kind of lets it go. And it's just doesn't need to be talked about anymore. You got to go get another coffee pot, but so what? They're readily available. Or at the opposite end of that spectrum, it's like, oh my God, you're, and this is what blame feels like to me. Why are you constantly not paying attention to your surroundings? You're always having accidents. You're so accident prone. And then that leads to the person going, oh God, I'm so sorry. I'll go get it. You stay here. I'll go get the new coffee pot and I'll clean all of this up. And so that's where the blame and the taking things personally at the opposite ends of the spectrum get to be almost debilitating, the way I kind of think about it.
So supposing it was the third coffee pot this week.
Interesting supposition.
You have an interesting life, Fred.
I didn't say this was autobiographical. I'm just wondering.
Hypothetical.
Just supposing, asking for a friend. No, I mean, I'm just being a devil's advocate. I'm just saying, okay, so yes, okay, they dropped the coffee pot, and we can, say, okay, they're having a hard day or whatever, and I won't blame them. And I'm wondering, I'm just testing your story, right? So let's say this is the third coffee pot they dropped this week. How is that still it is what it is? Or now do we start, yelling and screaming, or what do we do?
Well, I don't know that it was ever just what it is. It was always a stimulus to which there's always going to be a response. And it certainly is easier to imagine the third one of the week. It's going to get a very different reaction than the first one might have gotten. Totally easy to see. But kind of what that points me back to is the repetition of it and the cleaning up of it and the story of it. And it's like, God, when does this end? That just becomes mental static. And as mental static increases, our access to resources can diminish. And that the third one happening and flying off the handle, now we go back to the baby bumpers, could be those baby bumpers on the bowling alley that's keeping the ball in the alley. And maybe you just recognize my ball just hit the bumper. I may be overworking this analogy a little, but the first one, no big deal. The second one, a little bit of a bigger deal. The third one, it's bouncing down. It's like, all right, now you're just playing, and the bumpers aren't even working. But that flying off of the handle can be a signal to us to go, okay, what's going on? And to take a pause and to recognize, yeah, it's a third. And yeah, we could justify that. And we can do lots of rationalization and lots of stuff. And it's as we're doing those things that blame and fault start to become more important. So, I also kind of like the idea of the tachometer or the speedometer that shows you how fast you're going. And if you're going 55, but you're on the Autobahn, that's a problem in one way. If you're going 55 and you're in the school zone, that's a problem another way. If you're on a highway, that's just fine. And so it's not 55 in and of itself isn't good or bad. It's merely an indication, and it depends on the context and all of that.
I'm going to jump in here for a second because I just thought it was curious, and I thought about this before we went online, how blame and shame will often go hand in hand, and the examples that you give are kind of like that. It goes very quickly to you should have known better, and you should have, and then it becomes a shame. Oh, I'm an idiot, or why can't I stop doing? Oh, I keep reacting to the dogs, and I shouldn't do that, and so I'm not good enough, and it becomes a shame thing, not just a blame thing. I noticed when hearing about the third, was it a kettle being broken? My attention went to what's going on with you. Like the person, whoever's done this for the third time, what's going on with you? It's not going to what's wrong with you. So like smarten up, you're not paying attention. And one of my thoughts was, this sounds like a person who could have a problem with trauma, structural dissociation, and needs to be supported. And that, for me, an appropriate question is then, what's going on with you? What happened? If a person who is unable to pay attention, to be present, seems unable to be present, it doesn't help to blame. It actually makes it worse. So I get curious. That's when my curiosity showed up. And I noticed it happening the minute you started describing these situations, like what's going on with you. And this is actually a really interesting thing for anybody in any situation where blame seems to be arising. Either I'm blaming myself or I'm blaming another person. What's going on? Getting curious. Curiosity brings presence, in my experience, or at least opens up to the possibility of presence and healing and movement, because a lot of this sort of blame and shame thing keeps us spinning a loop on something that already has happened and can't be changed. It's not moving us in any direction that is, presence is now and now and now. It's not now and we stop. It's now and now and now. It's always in motion. So that sort of loop going back and thinking you can do anything about something that's already happened. Nope. So my responsibility is, what do I do about myself here and now? Or how do I meet another person present here and now and now and now? Danielle, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, my curiosity arose too, but it was kind of different. It was that maybe we shouldn't be drinking the dang coffee. Right? Like, we didn't go to a person at all. Like, why?
If
Why
you've
is it
got
always
3
the
coffee
coffee
pots, you
pot?
probably drank too much.
Metaphysical messages from the universe.
Right? It just, so my curiosity was piqued, but in a different way. Like,
Fantastic.
I could shift the conversation away from coffee for a moment, if that's okay. Actually, it's something that a clip that I saw recently that I thought did a really good job of sort of exemplifying some of what we're talking about. And I'm going to mention a name that may trigger some people, if not here, maybe somebody who watches this.
I think I know who it is.
What's that? Yeah. And I'll just take responsibility for that. So the person involved is Jordan Peterson, who,
Yep.
certainly has both his proponents and detractors. But here's what I saw, and it's a very short clip of an interview that he gave recently. And so there's this new movie that's just coming out, at least in the US, called, what's it called? Don't Worry, Darling, or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, it's some kind of movie about a cult, essentially. And the director, whose name is Olivia Wilde, says that she sort of patterned the cult leader after Jordan Peterson.
Ooh.
And so the interviewer said, what are your thoughts about that? And Jordan got emotional. And the assumption was that he's emotional because, and she said some very nasty things that I don't have to get into. Well, actually, I will say one other thing is she compared him to the leader of a certain group. They're called incels. I don't know if you guys are familiar with incels, involuntarily celibate. They're men who have difficulty attracting women, and they've kind of created this group of kind of circling the wagon sort of thing. And she compared him to these guys, like the leader of this group, in a very obviously not meant to be very complimentary way, meaning Jordan Peterson. And when he got emotional, the assumption was because she'd said something nasty about him. But when the interviewer asked him, what do you mean? He essentially, he was said something to the, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but that how much empathy he felt for a group of people who felt so disenfranchised, and it's interesting because it's so easy to gang up on these guys because they don't present themselves well, but he, so when she said the leader of these guys, he said, why not? Why wouldn't someone want to stick up for those people? And I thought it was very interesting where there was an opportunity to blame, someone had attacked him, like with the intent. It was a mean thing because she was really, you could clearly, the way she said it was, I want to hurt this guy, because she had already decided who he was. And his response was more one of compassion for the group that she just casually threw under the bus during her insult, which didn't reflect well on her as far as I'm concerned. And then he actually took it one step further. He said, when I first saw the preview, I thought that's a really interesting movie. I might like to go see that. So he even took a moment to compliment her movie, again, where the chance to blame was just so there for him. And it stuck with me. I've actually told some version of that story several times over the past few days since I've seen it, because I just thought, that's an opportunity, like an example of how people can behave in this world, where they don't have to initiate. There's that their ego isn't so fragile that the only response to something they feel attacked, they have to attack back. If we can truly learn to respond to someone's hateful or hurtful words with love, I think that that's a good sign that we're on the right track.
Yeah, and another thing that he said in that quote that stuck with me, that it had the same effect on me, was that isn't giving a voice to the disenfranchised something that we're supposed to be doing?
So nice, right?
And so as you're saying that, and this whole conversation, I'm beginning to see like responsibility and fault, like, if there's a car accident, somebody was probably at fault, and taking responsibility for that it feels empowering. Like what Jordan did felt very empowering, that he was able to sit there and let those tears flow, despite the fact it was a big interview, and experience the feeling. That's what is arising. Here it comes. And so accepting fault when you're at fault and taking responsibility for that is a cool, empowering thing. Whereas it's almost feeling like blame and shame are the opposite sides of the evil twin coin. And now we're evaluating and creating a hierarchy. But yeah, when you blame somebody else, and if they accept the shame of being blamed, lashing out is a reaction that would not surprise anybody. And in fact, the fact that Jordan didn't lash out in that circumstances now becomes noteworthy. It's like admirable the way that he acted.
Right. That's how I thought.
Yeah.
We actually talked a little bit about when we were going to decide the topic for this talk. One of the suggestions was presence and hurtfulness.
Mm-hmm. And
I hear you actually describing this. Interviewer sounds like there was some hurtfulness in there, some intent to hurt.
Not the interviewer was referring to.
Yeah, the other. Yeah.
Correct.
And thank you for making that clear. I will often observe hurtfulness being hand in hand with blame. It's almost as if, somebody did something to somebody. Okay, somebody did something to me. I'm blaming them for how I feel about it. If I feel hurt, for example, that gives me permission, that entitles me to hurt them because they hurt me.
Right.
So we go to this hurtfulness side of thing where I become a perpetrator in a way, because I've chosen to blame another person. And this can also be directed at myself. For example, people who self-harm or have other sort of self-destructive habits, put it that way, where I blame myself would be the pattern. And so I must punish myself. So I have to hurt myself. And then I feel better. I feel like I've righted some sort of wrong. I've established some sort of reestablished a balance somehow.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And people will often feel that they've done something right then. That's the kind of scary part of it, in a way. It's kind of like, okay, if I just blame you, I don't even check to see, it's like, okay, I'm just going to blame you. And then I'm going to do something to hurt you, or that I hope will hurt you, for example, because you hurt me. And I am entitled to that. I am doing this is a right action because you hurt me. So now I have the right to hurt you. And also I've done something wrong, so I should punish myself. I need to, it's my fault, so I need to be punished. And then I have the right to do that. And neither one of those things, I can certainly, if I manage to be present to that kind of cycle in myself, then I have the opportunity to move forward, move out of it, heal it, not act on it. But my experience is there is a active and reactive pattern. It goes in a loop again, and there's not presence in it. It's just more, you did this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to feel better because I need to feel better right now. And it doesn't really matter what actually happened or what the other person's intent or even my own intent really was.
And I would always ask permission before doing this with a client, but I would very, directly invite someone to just notice how it feels when they're in that loop.
Yeah.
Because it's painful. And the degree of unconsciousness, and we were saying this earlier, that you have to go into in order to not feel that pain, it's just not the direction we want to be moving.
Yeah.
Or at least, at the risk of sounding a little woo-woo, not the direction that our soul wants us to be moving. And I mean, if somebody were hitting themselves in the face with a frying pan over and over, you'd probably want to point that out if it was someone that you cared about. But the subtleties of blame and the way we wire it in our heads and in our egos to justify it, as Merriam, I thought, really eloquently pointed out, is a little more subtle than the obvious physical pain of it. So we have to be aware of it in a way that is not easy to always understand until maybe somebody else helps us to see it.
Yeah. Maybe somebody else helps us to see it. That's beautiful too, because we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
And as you actually very beautifully described with the Jordan Peterson experience, he stayed present. He didn't go into the reactive pattern. And then there was an opportunity for the person asking the question and assigning blame or whatever that was to snap out of it, to come out of it, to learn something, or to be with him in it and look at him or herself. I don't know if the person doing the talking was a woman or a man. I can't remember. Was it a woman?
Woman, the director of that movie.
Right. So there's an opportunity there.
I wish they could have been together. Like I would have loved to seen her response. And I don't mean that in like a gotcha kind of way.
Yeah.
Like it's a beautiful thing to watch someone soften who's in that, and then they're met with love. And to see if she could have done that, it would have raised my respect for her.
Mm-hmm.
Which took a little bit of a hit with that comment.
Yeah. Without it being the reactive kind of hit. I mean, I'm just going to qualify. I can't possibly know what was going on inside of Jordan Peterson. And it could very well be that he was passive aggressive in his response. I don't know. But assuming that he wasn't, it sounds like an opening for an opportunity there. And then
it would be brilliant if he was doing it that way. It would be brilliant, but I hope that wasn't what he did.
Yeah, I agree. There was an opportunity for quite, a very loving encounter in there.
Right.
Yeah. Danielle, I'm a bit curious, if you don't mind my asking, as you speak about having been addicted.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking a little about this blame and shame and also self-destructive behavior, this sort of self-punishment. Did you ever, or do you know? You don't have to answer my question, but I'm just curious if that was your experience of being with your drug of choice or whatever, however you would like to word that. And I don't mean it in an impolite way. I'm just not sure how to word it.
Yeah, it's fine. You can ask whatever you want about my journey. I'm here for it, right? Like my experience in addiction was, I think, one of reaching for some sort of control. So if I felt like the power was outside of me to control my life, or that I was going to get punished in life, that had sort of been my experience, that I might as well do it myself. And that way I have some modicum of control over that. I think that was a very unconscious pattern. Sure. It's not something I consciously thought, but in retrospect, you can identify those things that were going on. There were many things in retrospect that I can identify now, and that I understand moved me to the point that I'm in now. So I don't blame myself for it anymore, and I don't suffer from the shame of it at all, right? Like initially, that was a very strong emotion. In getting clean, there is a lot of shame to move through. But if it benefited me in the end, I lived through it. It made me stronger, right? It didn't kill me. It made me stronger. So why should I harbor any shame around it? It was just part of my journey. So I think that there are a lot of things that were said that make sense to me in this conversation of evolving from a place of victimhood and reaching outside of yourself for solutions, and believing in what we've been taught as opposed to what we might intuitively know. And that was a big shift for me, and it was a gradual shift. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't, it was a process, and it's been half my life now that I've been clean. So for me to be able to say I don't have any shame about it is a fair amount of time has passed since I've been actively using, so I haven't been triggered back into that behavior. But there were a lot of steps along the way to get free from that and to not blame. And I remember hearing somebody criticize the man that I learned horse whispering from, and his reaction was, I know it can be really hard. And that was it. So that it was noteworthy to me that he didn't defend himself and he didn't defend his beliefs, his practices. That's noteworthy, right? Like this same kind of thing with the Jordan Peterson, where your first response is not defense, we find noteworthy.
Mhm.
So that means that we're not really to that point we'd like to be, right? Like
Reminds us of what's possible.
collective, we're not reacting that way. We're still within the ego interaction most of the time. That's why we're here, though, because we know it's possible not to be.
Yeah, I like that, that just the behavior is a reminder that we're always free to, pick up on or not.
Mhm.
Just something else, talking about shame, just in terms of language, I like these distinctions that essentially we have three options: shame, guilt, and remorse. So shame is essentially there's something wrong with me.
Mhm.
This happened, and it just confirms something fundamentally wrong about myself, who I am as a human being, whatever. Guilt is just feeling, that what I did was wrong, having some sense of my behavior was inappropriate or whatnot. Remorse, well, notice first of all that shame and guilt are still both about me.
Mm-hmm.
Remorse is the acknowledgement I caused you harm, and for that I am truly sorry. And really, in remorse, also there's if you really it's remorse, there's an implied promise that this will not happen again. So I just think it's useful to notice where we might be on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Remorse is also, in my experience, about me, what I've done to myself.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah. And I was thinking a little bit about that, and I'm really glad you brought that up. With Danielle, when you're talking about the blame and the shame, part of the shame was, look what I've done to other people, but look what I've done to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the remorse, like the grief is the word also for me. Grief, when I realize the life I have lived compared to what I could have lived if I hadn't had this, right? And that's very often part of a healing process of getting present to something. It's not unusual for grief and remorse to show up. And it is not to be, as Bobby mentioned earlier, like pushed down. It is a process to be with and go through, because once it's part of being in the world and being ourselves in the world in a new way, and then moving forward to make more informed choices and ones more in line with what Fred would call our soul, as I understand Fred, and living in the spirit of life and not death and destruction and suffering is my take on it. And I should probably put my name and my contact information up there. because I keep forgetting. I do it when you guys talk and then I forget when I'm talking. So there it is. And now I'll take it away.
Pure selflessness.
Absolutely. Well, I'd call it old age and forgetfulness, but that's a different story. Another topic for another presence posse.
I hear presence and aging coming down the road.
Exactly. We have 3 minutes left, or well, 2 minutes left according to my clock. So anybody who would like to make some closing remarks as we come to the move towards closing this particular roundtable talk, please feel free.
I don't blame you. That's all I got.
Anybody else?
Yeah, the thing that I've just heard over and over in this chat is we have the opportunity to look at our emotions as telling us about our circumstances, or we have the opportunity to look at them as guidance. And, you know, this is just
It's 12 hours.
looking even at the blame, guilt, remorse spectrum, and where do you land on that spectrum. It's just a good opportunity to see kind of how we're doing on the inside. And that, you know, our prime responsibility is making sure that we're grounded, centered, and aligned, and operating from the best place that we're able to operate in whatever moment of now we're dealing with. And so I would just invite folks to use things when they are surprised, like by the Jordan Peterson response, or by the way that you react on the third coffee pot that gets broken in a week, or whatever, to say both what's going on with that person. I loved your thing, Merriam. You know, that just is the ultimate compassion. And it's really like, you know, there's somebody will say something crazy, and a common response back is like, who hurt you? And, you know, it's used kind of like almost as a punchline these days. But what a great thing when, you know, if somebody is off, to just have your first thing to go toward their well-being and how are they doing and what's going on with them, and to just be cognizant and present to that is it feels like a nice place to be.
Anything you want to say in conclusion, Danielle?
I really like the distinction between guilt and shame. And that was a very important one when I learned it for me, that I could feel guilt without feeling shame. I didn't know that previous to whenever I learned that many years ago, but it felt very freeing to me to be able to let go of that there might be something wrong with me, and to be able to land into presence where there is an actual experience of feeling whole and complete, and that lives someplace other than the ego, because the ego never believes that. But I believe it in my heart, and I believe that my ego can come along with my heart on this journey with me and learn that we're okay. And that's it.
Oh. Well, ego, yeah. I like ego. If I didn't have ego, at least the way I understand ego, I mean, ego makes sure I'm alive. Ego makes sure I eat. Ego makes sure I sleep enough. Ego makes sure I keep my body healthy. Ego makes sure I survive. It can kind of take too much space sometimes, and then I need to have a chat with it. Because survival, yeah, that's important, I think. But I don't have to survive all the time. And part of the journey with being present, and for me, has been knowing that I'm not fighting for survival, I'm actually allowing myself to live. I'm being in the world. When it comes to blame and guilt, and even remorse, there's an opportunity, an invitation to forgive. And some people say forgiveness is not my responsibility. It's, for example, God's. To me, it doesn't really matter as long as my intention is to let go and not carry the blame or the guilt. And there's an opportunity for healing in all of those moments when I can see and feel that, and feel my humanness and know my humanness and know that other people are just as human as me. And then I don't have to blame anybody because we're just being ourselves. That's my take on it, at least right now. And maybe that'll change in the next moment. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you to all of you members of the Presence Posse, including me, for what I thought was a lovely talk. I have no idea what next week's topic is, but everybody is welcome to join us again next Monday, same time, same place, for another roundtable talk with the Presence Posse. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you.